welcome back to the Songs to God podcast. It's your host, Ree, and today we're tackling the topic of feminism and religion. I am right now questioning my sanity at tackling this, but we're gonna go with it and see what happens. Just for your FYI, this is going to be a 3-part series because I feel like it's way too much information to fit into one video, and you guys know I am prone to talk a lot, and I don't want to be here forever, and I know you guys don't want to be here forever, so we're going to break it up and try to get shorter videos for you guys. So this first video is going to be on defining feminism. Then I want to talk about how women are portrayed and treated in various cultures and religions around the world. And then in the third video, I want to talk about what is actually written in the Bible. I've noticed a lot of people have misconceptions, and there are a lot of things that people think are in the Bible or aren't in the Bible because of how people who claim to believe in the Bible behave and present themselves and what they put out. So I want to do some kind of clarity and sanity checking about what the Bible actually says about gender and gender roles and things like that, and feminism. So we're going to break it up into those 3 different parts. So let's start off with defining feminism. Now, the reason I want to start the series with that is because people have very, very different definitions of feminism. I have talked to people, and some people will be like, no, like feminism is wrong. Feminism is what's wrong with the world. I don't like feminists, blah, blah, blah. And then there is this stigma of angry feminists. There are, they hate men and like all of these things. And so you start to see this idea brewing about these evil women who hate men and just want to get rid of all things male. And then you have other people who are like, yeah, I'm a feminist and I love men, and what they're saying feminism is completely different than what these people are saying it is. And so it's a mess because we're using the same word and we're meaning very different things, and this is what causes a lot of trouble in our world, period. Not just the word feminism, but for a lot of words, we're saying the same words, but we don't mean the same things. So before we can dive into this topic, we have to get on the same page about what feminism is. So I did some digging and I started researching the history of feminism. Guys, I am not an expert on feminism, and I am pretty sure just by trying to read some of these articles that people have done PhDs on feminism. That is not what I have my PhD in. So if I say something that sounds a little off, feel free to comment in the comment section, leave me a message, and I will correct it in the next episode. And I'll do some more digging. I'm trying to be as accurate as possible. I will link sources in the show notes and in the description as always. But from what I can understand, feminism in the modern world, particularly in the Western world, came in 3 waves. Some people will think there's a 4th wave. It is debated if the 4th wave actually exists. I'm sure in a couple of years they will be like, yeah, that was the 4th wave. Things like that usually come in hindsight. But for right now, we're going to say there are 3 waves. The first wave was around the women's suffrage movement. This was back when women didn't have the right to vote. Women didn't have the right to have a job. We could not own property. We were basically property ourselves. And doubly so for someone like me who is black. So in that time period, women had 0 rights. You were beholden to your father until you got married, and then you were beholden to your husbands. Husbands were allowed to beat their wives if they so chose. There was no law against that. There was no protection for women. The things that we call domestic violence today are things that those women would have been fighting for that to be an illegal thing in our society. Similarly, women couldn't own property. If you left your husband, you didn't really have the right to do that. But if you did do that, you would have just been homeless because you couldn't own property. And if you didn't have a husband, then how were you going to own property, right? things like that. You couldn't have a job, you know, and so as we move, you know, forward in time, you know, you have women who come up and fight against these types of things, and they start earning women the right to vote. They start making progress with, you know, women being able to work and things like that. And of course, as we got into the 1900s, with the wars, World War I and World War II, there became more need for women in the workforce. You start taking a lot of the men and shipping them overseas to fight, and who's holding down the fort, right? So this is when women really start to get a taste at being outside of the home and being allowed to work. Now, women still were being paid significantly less. There was still a lot of red tape around what women were allowed to do or not allowed to do. One of the things that sticks out in my mind about that time period, if you watch, for instance, Hidden Figures, one of my favorite movies, there's a scene where one of the ladies is talking about becoming an engineer. One of the men is trying to convince her to become an engineer. And he basically asks her, if she was a man, what would she do? And she was like, if I was a man, I'd already be an engineer. And it's basically, at that time, women were computers. All they did was compute the information. They weren't allowed to be engineers. And it's interesting, though, because I did read somewhere, I'm going to have to look for the statistic to link it back into, you know, the sources and everything, but I distinctly remember having this conversation at a conference somewhere where the statistics for women in engineering and in the sciences was actually higher back in like the 60s and stuff than it is now, which is very interesting to me. But I don't want to go off on tangents. Nonetheless, there was a continual thing for getting more rights, being able to do more things. This is when you start seeing, not only should I be allowed to do something other than be a housewife, but I should have the same opportunities as everyone else. Now, before we keep moving in history and in time, I want to stop to point out something, because I've noticed in conversations that I've had that sometimes things that I think are obvious are not obvious to the person I'm talking to. I had an experience where I was on a date with a guy, and he looked at me and he was like, when I was a kid, my father bossed me around. And now that I'm an adult, I have a boss, and my boss bosses me around. So when I go home, I just want to be the boss. And, you know, and I looked at him and I'm like, you know, your wife, whoever ends up being your wife, she had parents that bossed her around, and she's gonna have to work, and she's gonna have a boss that's gonna boss her around at work. When she goes home, she don't want to be bossed around either. Like, why does anybody have to boss anyone around at home? And like, the look on his face told me he had never considered the fact that a woman would feel exactly the same way. Like, he had this idea in his head that he wanted to go home and be the boss, and that somebody had to be the boss. But it never occurred to him that him being the boss when he got home meant that she would have a third boss on top of her parents and her work boss, and now she's being bossed around at home too. And it was almost like he thought, I don't know if he thought women liked being bossed around, because there are some people who just think women are wired so drastically different in the brain that we just like certain things that we don't necessarily like. But I don't know, it was just like very strange to me that it didn't make sense to him. So I want to point out something about this whole working thing. For men growing up, you know, pre-women's rights movements, when they were given the opportunity to work, it wasn't just, you're going to grow up and have a job, right? Because when we talk about it, it sounds like men work, women stay at home. And that sounds very black and white. But when you talk about staying at home, that entails raising kids, cleaning the house, cooking meals. That's really all it entails. There is no alternative for staying at home. I mean, like, maybe if you are like rich, like the rich women would have like maybe like bridge club or something like that, and they would throw, you know, like these galas and things to raise money. But it's not like there's a different type of housewife. Like, you can be this type of housewife or that type of housewife. Like, really, like, you're just a housewife. Like, your duties are going to be the same. For the men who are going to go to work, you got to actually choose an occupation. So, like, the man could be a carpenter, or he could be a police officer, or he could be a firefighter, or he could be a doctor, or a lawyer, or a vet, or a speaker, or a preacher. Like, there are actually different things that he could do. So as a little boy, he could say, I like to build things, so I want to be a carpenter. And then he could grow up and apprentice or go to school and become a carpenter. Women did not have the opportunity to be like, well, I like this, so I want to go do this, right? Like, that wasn't really a thing. They were just going to be at home. Now, maybe they would be able to do a little side something like, I'm going to be a hairdresser or something like that. And of course, as we get further into the women's rights movements, those are probably a lot more of the jobs women would have. So you would see women as teachers, women as hairstylists, women as seamstresses, the nurses, you know, the things that we think of today as being female dominated, essentially. Those were the things that women ended up. I did not be biased. Obviously, I am a woman. But I also would imagine that a lot of the jobs that were considered women's jobs, like being a nurse, being a teacher, being a seamstress, things like that, men probably didn't have the opportunity to do those things either. So, even looking at today's society, there are certain things that people look sideways at men if they decide that's what they want to do. So I'm pretty sure if in the 1950s a man was like, yeah, I want to be a hairstylist, or yeah, I want to be a seamstress, you know, people probably did look at them away. The same way they looked at women away if they said they wanted to be a doctor. So again, there's still this idea that this is a woman's path and this is a man's path. And feminism was trying to bring this together. Like, we can both walk down the same path. So also, as you start getting closer into the modern era, you end up with the sexual revolution. And I think this is also where a lot of the confusion starts to come in with what people think feminism is versus what it actually is versus, you know, a lot of other things, right? So this is the era where you start getting into double standards and the liberation of female sexuality and the body and all of these things. And, you know, now you're starting to get into the era of like Madonna, right? And being, you know, able to wear whatever you want to or express yourself however you want to express yourself. And of course, this is where I think you really start to get pushback probably from different religions, because, you know, this starts to go against modesty teaching, which is heavily skewed towards telling females what to wear as opposed to telling men what to wear or how to control themselves. So you start getting, this is, I think, at least I like to hope that this is where people start getting a little confused, not the whole we should have rights, we shouldn't be beaten, you know, men should not be allowed to be able to beat their wives. Hopefully early, like the fundamental early teachings in feminism, hopefully that makes sense to everybody. Hopefully we're all on the same page there. But as you get into like the 80s, the 90s, this is when you start to see a lot of the sexual revolution stuff, which continues on into today. You know, then you start getting into things like sexual harassment, the Me Too movement, which is where people start thinking that there may be a fourth wave of feminism. And I realize I've condensed a lot of information. There is a lot more to this. Like I said, there are whole textbooks on feminism, but we don't have all day to talk about it. Now, I do want to touch on this concept briefly of sexual revolution and modesty and I guess, immodesty. I don't even know if that means anything, because modesty and immodesty are very opinionated terms. But I want to mention something that I witnessed a couple of years ago that was very interesting. So, and I will caveat this in saying that I'm not really sure, I don't know the people that I was witnessing this of well enough to say that it is, that, well enough to make a sound judgment about it. I just want to paint a picture for people to think about. So I was in grad school, I was on campus late, and one of the professors showed up with his wife. I had never met his wife before, and so he was introducing me to his wife. We're in South Florida. It is like 90 degrees outside. It is hot, okay? It is burning up hot. We're standing outside the building, and he's introducing me to his wife. She is fully covered from head to toe. She has on long pants. She has on, shoes that are covering her ankles. She has on long sleeves. She has on a hijab. Her arms are fully covered. Everything is fully covered except for her hands and her face. And I'm not knocking that. I want you guys to know I am fully for modesty, and I don't think there's anything wrong with covering up. If, we're not going to get into that. We'll talk more about that when we get into what different religions talk about when it comes to women and things like that. But this is not she should have been, more bare, or she should have had on shorts or something like that. No, I don't think there was anything wrong with what she was wearing. It's just, I want to show you, I want to paint the picture of the juxtaposition, because he was in a short sleeve t-shirt and shorts. And he was standing there beside her, and and as I said, I don't know them well. So it could be a case where he's Christian and she's Muslim. It could be a case where she is a devout Muslim and he is just kind of and he might not have cared what she had on, and that was her personal choice to wear that. Or it could be that that was the expectation, and that he thought it was perfectly fine for him to wear that, but would have had a fit if she had worn something similar. And it was just interesting, because I was like, wait, why is it always that women have to be perfectly covered, but men can show their arms or they can show their legs? And I see conversations where guys get into it and they're like, but men are visual creatures. And I'm like, women are visual creatures too. In fact, we have better vision than y'all do. That is a scientific fact. We can see great. We can see all the colors, and we like seeing nice looking men too. It's just such a bizarre thing. And seeing that juxtaposition, I was just like, I guess this is why women fought for the liberation and the right to choose, the right to be able to say, I want to wear this or I want to wear that. And, when it comes to double standards, I will say, when you hear certain people speak about feminism, there are people who believe things that I definitely don't agree with. There are certain things that I'm like, yeah, nobody should do that, right? When you start talking about the sexual revolution, and some people will be like, yeah, women should be able to sleep with anybody and everybody whenever they want to. And I'm like, actually, I don't think anybody should be doing that, okay, right? So of course that's going to be more of my Christian perspective. I don't think men should be out here sleeping around, and I don't think women should be sleeping around. But I do think that the standard should be set for both people equally. If men can sleep, if women can't sleep around, men shouldn't be able to sleep around. These are where I'm like, yeah, I do think that there should be a standard, and it shouldn't be different for men versus women. So I'm saying all of that to kind of give you a history that there are various things that feminism touches on. The dictionary definition of feminism is basically the equality of the genders. Now, again, it's interesting, right? Because when I hear equality of gender, I definitely agree that men and women have equal value. When it comes to equality, it's very hard when we're talking about human beings to say one equals another. again, like I said, I think everyone is equal in value, regardless of your race, your religion, your color, your hair texture, your gender, like all of these things. Like everyone is equal in value. Like everyone deserves the right to life, the right to space, the right to feel safe, things like that. But when we talk about like equality, I mean, like, you guys are looking at me, unless you're listening on the audio only podcast. But for those of you who are looking at me, I'm a fairly small person. Even if I go to the gym every day, I'm only going to be able to lift so much. That's just facts, right? There are women who can lift way more than me. We are not equal in our ability to lift. There are men who are definitely going to be able to lift more than me. We are not equal in that. So there are things that I do think that, you know, that this person may be better at and this person may be better at. I don't necessarily think gender is a end-all be-all for understanding that. I like to think of it as levels. So one of the examples that I would say is, I'm pretty certain that if you went out, if you were able to actually do this, you can't do this, it's very difficult. Like, from a scientific standpoint, it would be very difficult to actually do this. But if you could identify the most athletic man in the world and the most athletic female in the world and compare them, honestly, I do believe that the most athletic male in the world would be more athletic than the most athletic woman in the world, just because of how the male body is created. But that doesn't mean that every man is more athletic than every woman, if that makes sense, right? It doesn't mean that a woman should not be allowed to play basketball, or that a woman should not be allowed to run track, right? Like, that kind of a thing where I'm like, when we use the word equal, I think that's where people start getting a little like mixed up in the head about what we're talking about, right? And then as you also branch off, like, that's more talking about like abilities and things like that, but just in how we are created, we are different creatures. I am a woman, and one of the things that sucks about being a woman is every month your hormones go crazy and your body tries to kill you for not getting pregnant. I am one of those people that suffers from that. I mentioned this briefly in the video that I did last week, and it sucks. Like, I would literally pass out. I've been at my new job for about 5 months, and of those 5 months, I think maybe... Okay, editing Cherie here. Realized apparently my camera cut off, sound didn't get recorded, whatever. What I was saying in the clip is that I've been at my new job for about 5 months, and of those months, I think 2 or 3 of them I've actually had to call in sick because I was incapable of working during that time of the month. I either couldn't stand up, I was dizzy, I had a migraine, something was prohibiting me from actually being functional, and that makes it very hard to function the way my job expects me to. And I would love to have more opportunities to take off for that. For instance, my previous job, sick leave and PTO were the same thing. So every time I had to take off for that reason, I had to use PTO. And that's something that is different for women that men don't necessarily have to deal with. And that's what I think I was trying to say in that little clip where I missed things. So back to other me. So, men don't have to worry about this, but that doesn't mean that they're not other things that men have to worry about. You may have some other sickness, or you may have something else that you're dealing with. And similarly, not all women have debilitating cramps. Some women don't even notice that it's that time of the month. Some women don't get a time of the month. So, it's not a one size fits all type of a thing, but I definitely understand this kind of hesitancy to say men and women are equal, that we should be treated exactly the same, right? Like, there is definitely a difference in being a woman and a man, but what that difference is going to vary for each woman and each man. But at the end of the day, I think I had equal value and equal potential in my field and in general as the men who were showing up to learn the same thing. And so at the heart, when I say feminism, when I'm talking about feminism going forward, if I use the word feminism, that is what I'm going to be referring to. The fact that men and women have equal value. So I wanted us to get on the same page there. Guys, I realized I left out a lot of stuff. I didn't really go into how race and intersectionality play into feminism. I encourage you to look that up within this week between when we go into the next episode, because like I said, there's so much information, but I didn't really want to get too to the left and to the right of the topic, because again, I didn't want to make the video too long, but also I wanted to focus in on a definition so that we know what we're working towards. And a lot of that is kind of tangential, and it's more about the history of feminism than it is about what we're going to talk about, because like I said, I just want to talk about men and women having equal value and where some of these ideas about gender roles and what's a woman's job and what's a man's job in society, like where these ideas came from and what these different religions and cultures actually say about this. So next week, we're going to tackle the different religions around the world and maybe some cultures, depending on what information I can find. And then, like I said, the week after that, we're going to go into more about what the Bible actually says, because people are very wrong about that. So stay tuned. I hope to see you again next week, and bye.